or watching the recording. Perfect. Great timing. Thank you for joining us on the second night of our two-part series on trauma-informed education. Last night was a night full of really great information and background on trauma with our wonderful leader, Simran Burt, who is a counselor at the Good Counsel Learning Center in Mankato, Minnesota. So I am going to just let her kind of talk about her background a bit more for tonight and let her just take it over from here. So thanks everyone for joining us and watching, and take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be back and much less nerve-wracked on night two. So like she said, my name is Simran Burt and I'm the academic manager at Good Counsel Learning Center. Good Counsel Learning Center is a community-based nonprofit in Mankato, Minnesota. We offer one-to-one instruction for individuals in grades K through 12, as well as adults. So a lot of my trauma-informed practices tend to lean towards the classroom space. But really, again, when we're talking about these classroom spaces, these really can apply to any organizational space or any environment as well. So I think I'm going to do today, not what I think I'm going to do, what I am going to do today is start off with just a review of some of the concepts and definitions we talked about briefly yesterday. And then I'll be spending the majority of the time talking about how to take these theories and ideas and this knowledge about what trauma is and how it affects individuals, and how to use that knowledge to create environments and spaces that help people prioritize healing. So before we jump in, I want to take a few minutes to kind of just ground ourselves in the here and the now. This is one of my favorite gifts. It was recently shared by, I think, like Blue Cross Blue Shield Insurance Company on Twitter, which is kind of cool. And the idea is to synchronize your breathing with the GIF, whatever that means for you, to breathe in or out as it expands or shrinks, but to take time to breathe. All right, so now that we've kind of grounded ourselves in this experience and started to regulate our emotions and upshift into the higher parts of our brain, I'm going to ask you to relate to me. So taking a look at this grid here, these pieces of art, on a scale of 1 to 9, how are you feeling tonight? A fellow 8, hello 8. 7, I am a little concerned about. Remind me to circle back and check on you. I'm definitely feeling like a 1 as well, deer in the headlights. So overall, looks like some pretty positive responses. We're feeling all right. So I want to start by checking in. For those of you that were with me last night, now that we've had about a whole day to kind of sit and let things marinate in our brain, what were some of your main takeaways from what we talked about last night? Feel free to jump into the chat or to turn your camera on, unmute yourself, and contribute that way. Welcome back, Mike. Welcome back, Mike. We're just debriefing right now and talking about some of the main takeaways from last night.
Good evening, all.
Welcome back, Lynn. I'm just taking a few moments to check in and share what some of the main takeaways were from last night. All right, so as you're finishing up in the chat, move on to a second question to check in. I'd like to know, kind of like last night when I asked, why are you here? What brought you to this presentation? I'd like to know what you're hoping to get out of tonight's session, tonight's presentation. Solutions, yeah, that's going to be the name of the game tonight. Solutions and strategies and tools. A better understanding of how to help. Yeah, really focusing on the how aspect. Yesterday was a lot of why and what. All right. So like I said, we're going to start with a brief review of some of the concepts and definitions that we talked about and were introduced to last night. So first thing is the definition of trauma. And we're really hitting on that definition of trauma is not just as the event in the past, not just the single or multiple adverse experiences, but the after effects of that adverse experience, of that trauma exposure. Types of trauma, types of events fall into one of three realms. We have household trauma that can involve bullying, physical and emotional neglect, incarceration, divorce, homelessness, or being precariously homeless, parental mental illness, alcohol and drug abuse within the home, and types of abuse and neglect. The second realm of trauma is community trauma, and these are some of the larger traumas that take place and affect multiple people. And those can include lack of social capital and mobility, discrimination, systemic racism, historical trauma, community violence, substandard to low standard schools, poor water and air quality, lack of jobs, food scarcity, substandard wages, poverty, and poor housing quality. So some of those larger systemic issues that affect whole communities. Oh, we have a young guest. Hello, friend. And the third type of trauma that we encounter that's becoming more and more salient is environmental trauma. Things that are triggered by natural disasters and climate crisis, such as record heat and droughts, wildfires and smoke, record storms, sea level rising, tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes, and what we're living in right now, a pandemic. And it's interesting, it's worthwhile to note that many of these community and environmental traumas can create circumstances which perpetuate further household trauma. So oftentimes the climate crisis has resulted in sea level rising, which has resulted in individuals being displaced from their homes and becoming refugees. Refugees are at an increased risk for experiencing interpersonal violence, such as physical and other types of violence. So again, we see how one type of trauma can often dovetail into another and perpetuate and create trauma. We also talked about the windows of tolerance. So on a good day for most people, the experiences that we have are not too shocking and overstimulating and not too boring and unengaging. We're able to stay regulated and keep our attention where it's needed most of the time. Where trauma comes in, and there are two types of trauma exposure we talk about, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 trauma, indicated by the pink line, shows that that is a single event or a single experience that happens in an otherwise normal window of tolerance. So a single large event that someone was witness to. The second type of trauma, complex trauma, as represented by the red line, presents itself in individuals who have been exposed to chronic toxic stress. So these individuals have spent portions of their life in toxic environments where they were constantly subjected to trauma. And so they spent a lot of time constantly being hypervigilant and hyper alert. And so we see that these two different types of trauma occur when someone leaves their window of tolerance. The second major thing that we talked about last night were the symptoms and effects of trauma exposure. And we will talk again more about structural changes in the brain. But again, one of the main takeaways from last night was that trauma exposure creates changes in the body and many of the organ systems, but specifically in the brain, structural, physical, chemical changes, many of which are permanent, but not all. So we talk about the brain, and in terms of evolution, we start at the back, low end of the brain, and we move up. As we move up through the brain, the structures become more complex and the functions that the brain controls become more complex as we move up through the brain. So we talk about upshifting into our students' prefrontal cortex, and we'll talk more about the sequence of engagement today. That means engaging all points of their brain in a linear order to help them reach that part of their brain where difficult tasks can be completed. We talk about some of the symptoms of trauma, which can include hopelessness, nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive memories, startle responses, being easily scared, internal symptoms like shame, self-hatred, emotional overwhelm. We can see not chronic symptoms, but panic attacks, problems with learning, such as decreased concentration, memory, and attention. Students can have, or individuals can have insomnia, experience irritability, depression, dissociation, as well as self-destructive behaviors and substance abuse. And one of the points we also went through last night is that the more adverse childhood experiences that an individual has been exposed to in their life, the higher their risk of certain health conditions and acquiring other conditions such as substance abuse disorder and things like that. So the effects of trauma and the symptoms are really far-reaching. They affect more than just your emotional life. It creeps its way into all aspects and parts of your body. We also talked about the core experiences of trauma. So these are the aspects of trauma exposure and survivorship that are not as easily observed. These are internal experiences. Those who have had trauma exposure report feeling disempowerment, helplessness, disconnection, repetition of the past, or feeling stuck in the past, and feeling like they didn't have a choice, a lack of agency. So as leaders, as organizers, and instructors, our role is to create opportunities where these individuals can have core experiences of resiliency, the antithesis to trauma. So instead of disempowerment, we find ways to empower these individuals. Instead of them feeling helplessness, we try to teach them ways to advocate for themselves and feel self-efficacy. We try to fight back against disconnection by creating community wherever we're at. We try to push back against repetition of the past and feeling stuck in the past by practicing mindfulness and teaching mindfulness and helping students to engage in the current moment. And the final thing that we push back against, the idea that students don't have a choice, we can counteract that by providing autonomy and choice for our students. Even in small ways, it really is important to them. And the third part we talked about last night was defining safety creating a safe environment is really top of the pyramid, is really core of these trauma-informed practices. Without a safe environment, behavioral interventions and a lot of this just don't tend to stick. And so when we're talking about safety in this context, we're talking about an environment that has high structure and high warmth. That means that an environment with high structure has clear expectations, clear rules, clear routines. There's transparency and predictability. Individuals know what to expect and what is expected of them. And an environment with high warmth is where individuals feel loved, connected, seen. They feel like they have been validated emotionally and in other ways. And so when we have combined high structure with high warmth, individuals feel safe and they're able to focus on their attentions on the things that matter. Any questions, clarifying questions about what we talked about last night? Any of these three concepts? And again, if as I'm talking, if you want to ask any clarifying questions or have anything to add, feel free to drop it in the chat. I've got one eye on the chat box at all times. All right, so right now we're going to talk about the neurosequential sequence, which is regulate, relate, and reason. So thinking about those diagrams of the brain we looked at, talking about upshifting into the higher parts of the brain, the more complex parts of the brain. The way that we upshift is through this regulate, relate, and reason process. So this is really central to these trauma-informed practices and connecting with these individuals and having meaningful interactions with individuals who have experienced trauma. I want to start off by highlighting this quote by Dr. Bruce Perry. He wrote, "There is no more effective neurobiological intervention than a safe relationship." So all of the changes to the brain and the body that we've talked about as a result of trauma exposure. Last night we alluded to the fact that, understanding these changes have occurred in you can also compound feelings of helplessness created by trauma as well too. And that can be really frustrating for students and anybody suffering from that. But again, the idea that there is hope, that the best thing that we can do, and possibly one of the easiest things that we can do to help people move beyond, move through, and begin healing, is to provide a safe relationship, a safe environment, a safe place for them to begin that healing process. So again, there is no more effective neurobiological intervention than a safe relationship. The best thing we can do for these individuals is provide safety, high structure, high warmth environments. So again, talking about the brain, we're starting back in the brainstem. This is our lowest part of our brain where the most basic functions occur. So this is a part of the brain that controls those automatic things like heart rate, breathing, basic survival, as well as where fight, flight, or freeze starts. So those really basic functions that you don't have any control over, and you couldn't really control if you tried. As we move up through the brain into the diencephalon and the limbic system, this is where we get those more complex functions like emotional response, complex emotions, not just feeling scared, starting to parse out more complex emotions. That part of your brain is responsible for motor coordination, hand-eye coordination, movement, and basic physical needs. And then as we move up through the brain into the prefrontal cortex, the newest part of our brain, this is the part of the brain that controls our ability to empathize and sympathize. This is where we get a lot of our self-control, where impulsiveness goes to take a break, and where we get a lot of our emotional regulation. So we feel the emotions in our lower brain, but we make decisions about how to express those emotions in our higher brain. The prefrontal cortex in the higher brain is also where literacy and critical thinking lives. So in order to fully engage individuals in whatever task we have at hand for them, if it's learning, safety planning, maybe just being mindful in the present moment, being part of a community event, we have to engage them by working up through the brain, up through those parts of the brain. And so we can work our way through the brainstem, diencephalon, limbic system, and neocortex by using the 3 R's, a sequence of engagement. This is how we reach the learning brain, but more broadly, this is how we reach the part of the brain that engages person to person. So first, we must help the individual to regulate and calm their fight, flight, or freeze responses. It seems like common sense, but when somebody is in the throes of terror and anxiety, they are not receptive to learning new things or receiving new information. It's very difficult to engage with them on a meaningful level because the only thing on their mind is survival. So before we can hope to engage with individuals in a meaningful way, we have to meet them at that emotional level and try to regulate them, to try to bring them back within their window of tolerance. So they are not overstimulated or understimulated. We want them to join us where we're at. After we feel that we've successfully regulated, co-regulated, regulated individuals, regulated ourselves, that's when we move up to the relate portion of the sequence of engagement. And here's where we must relate and connect with the individual. We have an attuned and sensitive relationship. So here's where empathy on our part as leaders starts to kick in, watching for signs in the individual, looking for opportunities to have conversations in meaningful ways and connect with that individual and make them feel seen, make them feel heard. This is really the warmth aspect of safety, making people feel welcome and heard, like they have a seat at the table and a voice. After we feel that we've related with individuals and that they feel connected, that they feel reconnected and tuned in, then we can move on to the reasoning part of the sequence. And this is where we support the individual to reflect, learn, remember, articulate, and become self-assured. So this is where the learning and the meaningful communication is going to happen. So only after going through the regulation and the relating process do we really have a good chance of fully engaging individuals in a way that they will remember, in a way that will have impact. Are there any questions about the sequence of engagement right off the bat? Okay, we're gonna go a little bit more in depth into the sequence now. So when we talk about regulate, the core task at the heart of regulate is creating stability and structure. So here's where you create that sense of predictability. The student knows what is going to happen. They understand. They don't feel the need to be on guard. This is where we help the individual to regulate and calm their fight, flight, or freeze response. We can utilize grounding exercises and activities, which I will share a number of those with you today as well. One of the things that helps individuals regulate as they come into your space is knowing ahead of time what to expect. So if you're dealing with regular clients, regular individuals, keep your plan the same and predictable week to week. When individuals come in your door, especially more than once, they should know what to expect the first time they meet you, and the second time and the third time. No surprises, and in an environment where there are no surprises, individuals feel safe to let their guard down. They're able to focus on things other than worrying about what comes next. So what that looks like in a real world context is to create routines, mindfully create routines for your space, and communicate any schedule changes early and often. Obviously, we can't always stick to a schedule, stick to a routine. Life happens, things happen. But to communicate that with individuals, and again, to give them the opportunity to change their plans and to change and to adapt to the new plans that you have as well. So there are a number of grounding strategies that we can actually use, and I'm going to share a link in the chat for us to visit. And this is a list of grounding techniques and activities that I have used, oh boy, in the classroom, in my work with as a CNA, and in medical contexts like that, with my own like family, nieces and nephews, and some of my older family as well. These are grounding techniques that you can really use at any time or any place. So the first grounding technique that I'm really fond of for regulating students is called 5-4-3-2-1s. They're pretty easy to remember because we have 5 fingers and 5 toes, so it's pretty hard to lose count. And so with 5-4-3-2-1 senses, the first activity, this is generally a great one for kids or individuals with limited vocabulary. All they need for this exercise is their hand and their senses. And so often what I'll ask students to do or individuals to do is to identify 5 things that they can see immediately around them. Following that, 4 things that they can hear if they settle in and listen carefully. Following that, 3 things they can smell, 2 things they can touch from where they're sitting, and 1 thing they can taste, even if it's the back of their own teeth. I will take that as an answer. This exercise brings individuals back into the present moment. This is especially handy if an individual is having some sort of flashback or some sort of dissociative episode, to kind of help them slowly tune back in to the reality that we are currently in. Likewise, we can also do a 5-4-3-2-1 with sights. This is often great in limited environments. If someone is having in a car or something like that as well too. Asking someone to identify 5 colors they can see, 4 shapes, 3 soft things, 2 people, and 1 book or 1 cup, and to have them pointed out to you. Again, the idea is to ground the individual in the present moment and to limit that core trauma experience of repetition of the past, to bring them away from reliving the traumatic event, the adverse experience, and into the present moment where they are safe and warm and loved and comforted. Other exercises involve ABC around the room. So just counting things around the room or naming things around that room in alphabetical order. There's also some activities you can do that, such as Be a Tree or the Power Hug, that really incorporate physicality. Some individuals respond really strongly to strong touch, but again, sometimes applying strong touch to individuals in our life is not appropriate for the context. So giving these individuals, instruction to provide their own physical comfort can be really powerful as well too. I like to keep an object box in my administrator's office. Oftentimes when we have individuals displaying anxiety or problem behavior, the first thing I'll hand to them is this object box, and I'll have them reach in and grab something. And maybe they'll fidget with it, maybe they'll just stare at it. What they do with it in their hands is not really my problem, not really my business. But then I try to engage them and say, what do you have there, friend? How does it feel? Can you describe it to me? Why did you grab that out of the box? And again, the focus being bringing their attention from whatever distress or reliving of past events is happening in their head. And again, bringing them back to the present moment, to the environment that you've created that is safe and warm and welcoming. Again, this link is available to you. At the end of the presentation, I will also share a link to a participant folder where I've been storing resources for probably months now, including some of these grounding techniques. There will be some reading lists for further education as well too. So this grounding techniques list will not go away. All right. And so when I refer to grounding, just to be clear, that's talking about using the 5 senses to return to the here and now, practicing mindfulness. So counting, being aware of your thoughts as they pass through, focusing in on breathing is a really simple, effective way to help individuals ground and regulate. And encouraging folks to observe their surroundings can be very helpful as well, too. I consider it a really good idea to have some of these strategies to soothe dysregulation or to re-regulate ready to go. It can be really unpredictable when you'll encounter a dysregulated individual. And not everybody responds to the same grounding exercises in the same way. And so it's important to have more than just 1 or 2 tricks up your sleeve. Again, every person's mind experiences are different. And so the tools you bring to help them also have to be diverse. So again, talking about grounding, that's using the senses to return to the here and now. And that includes activities like mindfulness, breathing, and observing your surroundings. If you have students that are more tactile and you know that they would respond well to a tactile intervention, you can encourage them to feel the ground beneath their feet. If it's appropriate, have them remove their shoes and dig their toes into the carpet or whatever the flooring is where you're at. Encourage them to really ground themselves, to physically ground themselves. We can encourage rhythmic tapping. This can be very, very soothing. Making fidgets available, poppets, fidget spinners, something to keep the hands busy. You would be amazed at how much anxiety can be released just through using the hands to fidget. Also consider keeping weighted blankets and vests available if that isn't appropriate for the environment that you're in. Sometimes that can take the place of a really heavy bear hug from individuals and allow them to step into that experience and leave as they want. Encouraging individuals to just feel their breath can be a really powerful way of reconnecting, especially if they're feeling physically disassociated. Taking inventory of the room temperature, maybe just asking yourself, do I feel cold? Do I feel hot right now? And tuning into those feelings you have with the largest organ on your body, your skin. And encouraging individuals, if they're really dysregulated, some sort of shock to the touch. So we're not using ice or things like that, but encouraging them, why don't you go wash your hands with some cold water? Or, again, splashing cold water in your face really can be a way to kind of bring you back and calm you down enough to re-engage, at least temporarily. If you have students that you think would be more scent oriented, you can make available soothing scents in the forms of lotions and essential oils. Again, if that's appropriate for your environment, having a Scentsy with something nice and relaxing, melting in it could be nice. However, I will issue a strong word of caution that scent is the sense most closely tied to memory. Not only is it closely tied in like an emotional way, but it's physically located. They're located closer to each other. And so scents can be very, very triggering in very immediate and severe ways. And so before you use scents to help dysregulated individuals, you need to be aware whether or not that scent might be triggering to them. I often refer to scent as kind of like my last resort tool, just because there is a lot of unpredictability about what scents may trigger somebody else. We can use sight to bring back regulation, asking individuals, what do you see in the room? Or playing a game of I Spy. I'm a really big proponent and advocate of adult coloring, especially the mandalas and things like that. It's fun, it's relaxing. At the end, you get something pretty that you can hang on your wall. And combining visuals with rhythm. So oftentimes you just type in, groovy study music and visuals. Some genius on YouTube has put together some really spacey, cool visuals and some kind of nice music. And that can be a really nice thing to put on to help individuals like refocus and re-regulate and kind of help them calm down and help them upshift within the brain. Using the sense of hearing, we can offer individuals the experience of a guided relaxation or guided meditation. There are tons of apps and tons of videos that have these meditations available. Some are as short as 3 minutes, some are as long as 2 to 4 hours. So whatever suits your needs. You can also play nature sounds, thinking about white noise. Those nice little white noise machines can be really helpful for helping individuals regulate and stay regulated. As well as a lot of value in music and rhythmic drumming. Again, that moving the body aspect of it. Speaking of moving the body, movement can be a really powerful tool for dysregulation. So encouraging individuals to take a walk or doing walking meditation. Try something more physical like wall sits. If the environment is appropriate, offering them opportunities to engage in dancing or yoga. And again, the healing powers of communal and group drumming have been talked about a lot, and that's something to look into as well too. And again, offering individuals the distraction or the opportunity to use taste as a tool to kind of help regulate themselves. I use lemon drops to help regulate myself when I'm feeling stressed or anxious. I'll be constantly eating lemon heads. Something about the flavor and taste is just really soothing to me. So if that's something you can make available in your environment, maybe having some candies available for individuals to have, or even consider, revising your rules about eating in class. That's something that might be a comfort. All right. And so another tool that I love to use for regulating, again, and you'll see these throughout my presentations, are these nice meditation GIFs. If you just go into Google and type breathing GIFs, relaxation GIFs, you'll find some really pleasant illustrations that, can walk individuals through calming themselves down on their own, and taking back some of that autonomy and that self-efficacy and taking charge of their own regulation. So in this GIF, we have us inhaling as the ball bounces up the stairs and exhaling as it rolls back down. So after we've regulated individuals and help them step back within their window of tolerance, this is where we can move into the middle parts of the brain and begin the process of relating to them and providing warmth. So when we relate to these individuals, we have to connect through attuned and sensitive relationships. Many of us have the opportunity to get to know individuals really, really well. And so we can have deep relationships in that way. But even if you're dealing with an individual that you've never met before and you may never see again, there are ways to make them feel warm, make them feel seen, practicing culturally appropriate eye contact, welcoming body language, as well as things like that. But again, individuals are not able to respond to these relational aspects, this warmth, this connection, until we've regulated and brought their emotions into that window of tolerance and got them out of the part of the brain that controls fight, flight, or freeze. Some strategies that we can use to encourage relation, the warmth and connection, is checking in often with people in the environment. Not just the clients, not just the individuals you work with, but your colleagues. Again, a lot of the focus when we talk about trauma-informed practices puts the individuals in these webinars kind of at the top, looking down or out at other people who have trauma. But we also need to consider the fact that there are traumatized individuals within our own ranks as well too. And so applying these concepts to not just the people that you work with, what you work for, that you serve, but the people that serve with you as well. Checking in often with your clients, with your students, with your coworkers, making sure they're okay, making sure that they feel seen. And practicing and modeling active listening. So when I describe active listening, what I'm talking about is someone else is talking and you are giving them your fullest attention possible at that moment. You are listening to what they're saying to understand their perspective. You are not listening, thinking about what you are going to say next. Active listening is a very difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of energy to listen closely to somebody. but it really does make a difference in how individuals, the simple act of listening to someone can be so healing and make them feel seen and connected. And the additional benefit is that when we model active listening for individuals, that is something that can be learned through modeling as well too. So setting a good example as a good listener. All right, so I have a couple of questions that I want to discuss, again, either in the chat or by unmuting or within the groups you have out in your individual parts. But the first question I have is, what types of relationships do you observe in your organization? If you're a school, talking about your school or classroom, if you run group therapy and group sessions, what kind of relationships you see there? If you're at a shelter, what kind of relationships do you see there? I'm talking about participants and these traumatized individuals, staff, any of the humans in your organization. What types of relationships do you observe in those spaces?
In our dropout recovery program, these are all mainly kids who have been through trauma. And our entire staff treats them as they're definitely wanted. They're greeted with a smile every time they come in. Every time an adult sees them, they stop and ask them how things are going. And this program, even the teachers are really phenomenal on it, but just how they've been accepted throughout our whole organization. We have over a 90% success rate in getting them through their high school equivalency and getting them on either to a job or to higher education. And again, we've consciously created the environment that they know that they're welcome in our organization.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anyone else care to share in the chat or on video? So Mike's answer kind of dovetails into the next question, but how do you foster those relationships that you see? Or how could you foster those relationships that you would like to see and don't see? Helpful. Students help one another in the classroom, but in the jail, my student is alone. Yes. So those different dynamics can really affect how those connections are. When we're in those classrooms, it's a little bit easier to facilitate because we have the freedom to do that. And again, that harkens back to the structure and warmth model. In incarcerated individuals are really in high structure, low warmth environments. And it can be really challenging, if not impossible, to bring warmth into those environments in meaningful ways. Yeah. One of the ways that we can start to create connection is by instituting check-ins with students, either as part of your routine or informally. And that means observing in real time how students are responding. So taking time out of whatever you're doing to mindfully stand in the room or kind of put an eye on the people you're working with and just take a minute and watch them and see how they're responding to the environment. That can be really, really telling as well too. So as you're watching individuals respond, paying attention to those individuals who may be in need of regulation, those individuals who may be in need of relation, individuals in need of more structure, individuals in need of more warmth, and using those observations and that knowledge about the individuals that you have to create ways to respond to them, either one-on-one directly or through organizational changes. When you're engaging with these individuals, keep in mind that sequence of engagement. Regulate, relate, and reason. Ask yourself, are these individuals ready to talk to me? Are they ready to have reasonable, rational, logical conversations? Or do I need to re-engage them before I continue? there's no harm in taking a little bit of extra time to go back to the first step in the sequence of engagement. You're only going to save yourself time in the long run, because again, when individuals are not in the front top part of their brain, again, they're not able to engage with us in meaningful ways. And it's, in some ways, it's like talking to a wall when you haven't re-engaged. Welcome back, friend. I see another comment. When I connect with the incarcerated student, the change is a great thing to see. Yeah. Yeah, that relationship part, yeah, even though it kind of is stuck in the middle of the heuristic, I really found that it's the most profound. And that's really the most rewarding part of it for, I think, a lot of us, including myself, is that relationship building and seeing how folks come into their selves emotionally and socially. You know, and if it's appropriate, I encourage you to go beyond the classroom or go beyond the immediate contact environment you have with individuals. So in the school setting, I encourage teachers to assign group work in class that gets students talking to each other in a controlled, safe environment. And then following your observations or knowledge about the students, encouraging the students to follow up with members by forming study groups outside of class. That can create opportunities for not just academic engagement, but further motivation, outside connection. Once we started implementing study groups, we actually saw better attendance because students were making friends with each other and communicating and giving rides to each other. So that was another benefit of this community building. And again, create opportunities for students to gather around shared interests or opportunities. So give them chances to work on projects together or offer opportunities for trips. Again, a lot of times, especially in the educational setting, we can get really stuck on grade level or reading level and sorting individuals into these little boxes and not allowing a lot of relationship building path through those categories. So finding opportunities to get individuals who might not otherwise connect, to get them connected. And thinking about vertical connection, so individuals connecting with people higher and lower in the social hierarchy as them, as well as horizontal connection, people connecting with those that are most like them. I also think it's really important that you need to be mindful that individuals who are not engaging and not relationship building, maybe just have good reasons to not fully engage in the current mode of relationship building. Some individuals are simply too traumatized to have relationships at this point in their life. Some individuals are not open to it. So don't assume that an individual is just being obstinate because they're not making connections. Shifting the narrative from what's wrong with you to what happened to you is really, really powerful. And not meeting students with anger, or individuals with anger and indignation, but curiosity. And so I think that's a really important note, that you should never require or expect individuals to share sensitive information or physical proximity with another individual. It can be really tempting in a lot of settings to encourage people to bond by sharing vulnerable things about themselves. And even though that is a fast track to feeling close, it doesn't do anything to actually encourage community. So if individuals are having reservations about the activities that you're engaging in and having reservations about sharing part of themselves, it's really important to respect that. I like to have a number of these kind of like activities on hand to encourage relationship building, especially with some difficult individuals or folks it's hard to kind of get talking. This game called Story Stitch is available from greencardvoices.org. I love this game. So essentially there are 2 decks of cards within it. One deck are question cards and one deck are connection cards. And everybody gets 4 connection cards that they can play at any point. And the idea is that someone plays a question or a prompt, they put it on the table and then they answer it. And anybody can take their connection card, put it on the table and also answer the prompt. And it's a really great way of fast tracking conversations. The prompts in this deck are really thoughtful and really mindful of cultural differences. And they also are so well written in that they encourage individuals to share, to be vulnerable, but not in a way that can be frightening or intimidating as well too. So I highly encourage you to check out any of the games or activities available for Green Card Voices. Their stuff is usually primarily geared towards immigrants and refugees, but I found it works with a wide variety of individuals, low literacy, pre-literacy. It's just good stuff. All right, so now I have some questions, either for discussion or just kind of for silent reflection. If you don't feel like sharing in the chat, even just jotting down a couple of your answers of your own in your own notebook for further reflection later. So the first question I want to pose to you is, what support systems do the individuals in your communities, the individuals that you serve, your students, already have available to them? Maybe you can count the services you provide, the services in the community. What support do they already receive?
In our little town, we don't have very many support systems for my ESL students, really, that I'm aware of. But I have been designing and taking them on field trips to meet various people within the town. And so we went to the town hall, we're going to the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, and so the clinic, so they can see what could be available to them, and maybe even for employment.
I love that. Yeah. I often wonder how many individuals simply don't know what resources are available to them, so doing what you can to help close that gap, to help educate. At the organization I work at, we have a binder that we update every quarter with information about transitional housing, affordable housing, food availability, free and low cost clothing and transportation. So we have a student coming in that is experiencing some of these obstacles. We have the information about available resources already available in a binder, and we can just look at the correct tab and try to get them connected. That ties into the next question. So what resources are available in your communities to further support learners, and how can you make them more accessible? So one thing, coordinating field trips to help get students acquainted with these resources is a great idea. We did that at Vine, and it was amazing how many of our students didn't understand the idea of, that they could go to the food shelf. And we eventually worked out a program with the food shelf where we were able to have class there once a week, and the students were able to use that time to do their food shelf shopping as well too. So how can you make resources more accessible? Next question I want to pose. First, a statement that a huge part of relating to others is creating an environment of mutual respect. So as leaders, as advocates, that's our responsibility. So thinking about the idea of mutual respect, that everyone understands that they are respected and they give respect. How do you show your students, the individuals you serve, that you respect them? So while you're thinking about how you show respect for others, how do you expect others to show respect for you? I learn their backstories if they're willing to share. Yeah, curiosity goes a long way. Not only does it show that you care about who they are before they came to you, who they are as a whole person, but those backstories can provide a lot of valuable information as well too. When you're thinking about the ways that you show individuals you respect them and you expect them to show respect for you, are those two modes the same or different? If they're different, Why? Why are your expectations for giving and receiving respect different? Again, not asking you to answer these questions, but things to consider. Thinking back to the idea of a safe space, a space with high structure and high warmth. What does a safe space look like to you physically? So when you see a safe space in your mind, where is it? What does it look like? What qualities does it have? What is a safe space for you emotionally? How do you know you're safe to experience emotions and be emotionally vulnerable in a space? What about spiritual safety? How do you know it's safe to share your inner spiritual life? So as you envision that safe space, leaning more in, I gave you the trauma-informed practices definition of safety. But what does safety mean to you as an individual? Does it mean just simply being free from being uncomfortable? Or is it something deeper than that? Is it something more profound? All right. Again, one of the tools I like to use for relating are these little relation grids. Again, you can find a whole mess of these on websites like Pinterest. You type in how are you meme or something like that. You can find a lot of these. So I like to make use of these because these can be used with a wide variety of individuals, low literacy, no literacy. It's a pretty simple way to communicate how we're feeling. Instead of connecting feelings to words, we're connecting feelings to images. It's a few steps less through the brain in that way. So asking you, those of you out there, taking a look at ducks 1 through 9, how are you feeling right now? Mike is a 6, sinking, but looks very happy and peaceful about it. A 2, yes. I'm gonna say that I'm feeling a little bit like an 8, just because I am an hour ahead of all of you out there. Another 6, good. Has anybody seen these giant rubber ducks in real life? I feel like that would probably complete me as a person if I saw one of them, honestly. We have another 2. All right. Excellent. Any 9s? Are there any 9s out there? If there are, my condolences. All right. So actually, I think what we're going to do is this is a great place to take a break. We were just talking about regulating and relating before we engage people in reasoning. So before we engage in that reasoning part of our brain in this presentation, let's just take a quick, maybe 5-minute break. Just stretch, get a drink of water. I'm going to give my cats attention so they stop screaming at me. We'll regroup back here in 5 minutes.